Welcome to In the Word, a study of the International Bible School lesson. Join Dr. Lee Magnus, Professor Emeritus of Bible, and Dr. Bill Gwaltney, Professor Emeritus of Bible, both from Milligan College, as they bring you their thoughts and knowledge of the study of the Sunday School lesson for the day. Now, here is Dr. Gwaltney.
Good morning. This is Palm Sunday, and we remember the events of our Lord coming into Jerusalem in triumph on this Sunday, and what a difference 1 week made in the story of his life and for us. Dr. Magnus is with us this morning as usual. So glad that you're here. We're dealing with the topic of faith.
Yeah.
And we've been looking at the Gospel of Mark.
Right. And we are in the last week of Jesus' life in our lesson today, but a little later in the week from where we are in our church celebration of Palm Sunday.
Let me ask a favor of you, especially for our viewers. Why don't you summarize the events of that last week between Palm Sunday and Easter Sunday,
right?
And we're following the chronology of the Gospel of Mark.
Gospel of Mark. Okay.
So we begin with Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem.
And that took place on a Sunday, the first day of the week.
Yes.
At the end of the triumphal entry, Jesus went into the temple courtyards and looked around and noticed all the money changers and the sellers of sacrificial animals and all.
They were getting ready for Passover.
Right. So it was more crowded than ever with people and with shop salespeople and moneylenders and changers. But he did nothing that day. He went back out to Bethany overnight and came back first thing Monday morning. And two things happened that we know of from the Gospel of Mark. One was this encounter with the fig tree.
En route.
Yes. And then what we call the cleansing of the temple.
Yes.
And those two things are actually related because the point of Jesus' teaching about the fig tree is that it wasn't bearing proper fruit. And that really is his objection with the temple worship as well.
Yes.
It wasn't doing its proper thing. It wasn't bearing proper fruit. Instead, it had become a way to make money and a center of commercialism and nationalism.
Right.
Yeah. Then Tuesday, he's back in the city for a long, difficult day of teaching in which he is bringing some of his most difficult teachings to bear and is also being challenged by all different groups.
Well, it begins with a challenge. And the challenge flows out of what happened on Monday. Who gives you the authority to come in here and cause a public disturbance in this holy place?
Yeah, and even to teach in the temple was a matter that was offensive to the leaders there, to the priests.
Yeah, true.
So that was Tuesday. Wednesday seems to have been a fairly quiet day. He may have stayed out in Bethany all day.
But he seems not to have, as far as the Gospel of Mark is concerned, he seems not to have gone into the city.
Right.
And again, where is he staying when he's not in Jerusalem?
2 miles or so east of the city in Bethany with his friends Mary and Martha and Lazarus.
Right.
Yeah. So then Thursday he comes back in with his disciples, and this is when the Last Supper occurred.
Well, he commissions 2 of them. He tells them where to go and what they'll find, and that they should, in fact, follow his lead and go to and prepare the Passover.
Right.
The Passover it takes most of the day before to prepare for it, because you have to get the appropriate animal. You have to go through a ritual slaughtering at the temple, and it's a very involved thing. And in fact, there's a whole tractate in the Mishnah that describes what you do in preparation for Passover.
So that would have taken most of Thursday preparing.
During the daylight hours.
During the daylight hours.
Yes.
And then that evening they gathered together, and we're pretty familiar with the events of that meal in which Jesus gave some teachings, washed their feet.
Identified the betrayer.
Yes. And
the betrayer leaves.
They ate the meal, of the Passover meal, and during that Jesus instituted what we understand to be the Lord's Supper.
Yes.
During the Last Supper, and then it's at the end of that meal that our lesson picks up today.
You're right. Now, track the rest of the events, though. On Thursday night, the meal starts after sundown and may go as late as midnight.
Yeah, well, and this surely would have, because there was a long conversation between Jesus and his followers, lengthy teachings which are recorded in John's Gospel.
Mostly John, but not very much of that at all in Mark.
Right. And there was the foot washing, the eating, the teaching, and then very late, very, very late, they would have gone out to the Mount of Olives, to
they
the garden.
seem to have crossed through the courtyards, maybe the court of the Gentiles, because as they're walking along, we get in Matthew's Gospel this big, long discussion about the destruction of the temple and all of that on their way to the Mount of Olives.
Yeah. And in the Mount of Olives, we have Jesus' time of prayer. Then the arrest occurs, and then a series of trials begin. Some are kind of informal hearings before the Jewish high priest, and then we get the trials before
the Sanhedrin.
The Sanhedrin and Pilate, the Roman governor.
Right, Herod.
Eventually,
Herod Antipas.
According to Luke, he saw Herod Antipas. Then the crucifixion, and then
on Friday morning,
the burial before sundown on Friday, before the Sabbath started, and then the events of the resurrection on Sunday morning, just 1 week after the triumphal entry.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there is the last week of Jesus in summary fashion.
Now today's lesson focuses a lot on Peter and his involvement in the events of Thursday night, early Friday morning.
That brings us to a much larger question about the entire Gospel of Mark. When was it written, by whom, and what's the story on that?
Well, according to an early Christian writer that I think we can trust pretty well, his name was Papias, and he wrote around 115 A.D., and claimed to have had direct contact with the Apostle John.
Yes. So you got a really strong tradition there.
Very, very strong. According to Papias, Mark was traveling with Peter as a fellow missionary.
Yes.
During the time of Nero's persecution.
By the way, there's a strong indication in the New Testament that Mark and Peter were together in Rome during Nero's time.
Yes.
In the book of 1 Peter.
Exactly. According to Papias, Mark was with Peter, working with Peter as his ministerial associate at the time of Peter's execution in the late 60s, say 68, 69 AD. And that when Peter died, the Christians in Rome prevailed upon Mark, who had been listening to Peter preach day by day, week by week, prevailed on Mark to set down in writing what Peter's memories of Jesus were. So what we call the Gospel of Mark is, in a sense, the Gospel of Peter, the Apostle.
Yes. What he preached and what he taught.
His memories of Jesus.
Yes.
So that's kind of interesting. And so we're not surprised that the Gospel of Mark is full of stories about Peter. What might surprise us a little more, it does surprise me some, is that not all of the stories about Peter in this gospel are positive. We get to see his
the warts,
his bad side as well. But that gives it even more a ring of authenticity for me, that we get to see both sides.
Well, the thing that surprises me is there just are not. Mark doesn't deal with post-resurrection appearances the way the others do. And we would, we want the story to turn out good for Peter.
Right.
And yet, Peter is not exactly returned to the flock when Mark ends.
That's true. But I think, and we'll talk about this next week when we talk about Mark 16, I think there are hints there that there is a reconciliation and a restoration of trust with Peter. So we can talk about that next week.
Yes, yeah. we better leave something for next week.
Let me read this story then. We have some verses from Mark 14.
And several things that need explanations.
Good. We'll start at Mark 14:26. When they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. You will all fall away, Jesus told them, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. Peter declared, even if all fall away, I will not. Truly I tell you, Jesus answered, today, yes, tonight, before the rooster crows twice, you yourself will disown me 3 times. But Peter insisted emphatically, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. And all the others said the same. Now we skip down to verse 66. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. When she saw Peter warming himself, she looked closely at him. You also were with that Nazarene Jesus, she said. But he denied it. I don't know or understand what you're talking about, he said, and went out into the entryway. When the servant girl saw him there, she said again to those standing around, this fellow is one of them. Again, he denied it. After a little while, those standing near said to Peter, surely you are one of them, for you're a Galilean. He began to call down curses, and he swore to them, I don't know this man you're talking about. Immediately the cock crowed the second time. Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken to him, before the rooster crows twice, you will disown me 3 times. And he broke down and wept.
I like the way the old King James puts it. Mm-hmm. Before the cock crows thrice, you will deny me twice.
Yeah. Before the cock crows twice, you will deny me thrice. Yes,
I Did I get it backwards?
Yeah, you did. But yeah, I agree. It kind of rhymes, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah. Well,
very poetic.
Our text starts right in the middle, or I guess I should say right near the end of what we call the Last Supper.
Yes.
So we've had all of those events, and now it says, when they had sung a hymn, they went out. That is, they left the upper room.
Yes.
Do we have any idea what this hymn would have been?
Well, I have wondered about this because, I frequently do a Seder, Christian Seder, and the Seder as it is now ends with a section called May We Be Accepted, may our celebration of the Passover be accepted. And there is praise to God in that section. But we can't know for sure how much of the present day Seder or Passover tradition was in use in the days of Jesus that we're talking about. But we know that the word hymn in Greek refers to a song or some sort of poem that is in honor of God.
Right.
So whatever it is, it could be a psalm, or it could be some sort of prayer, or a prayer or a statement of praise to God that was sung. Because I believe it is, the verb here is to sing.
Yes.
And we might better understand it as chant.
Okay.
And yes.
So they chanted some kind of a song of praise. It may have been one of the Psalms as we know them, but it was some song of praise. Now it says they went out to the Mount of Olives, which was a hill, is a hill that
kind
lies,
of a mountain.
Yeah.
A range.
Right. It's a ridge, isn't it?
It's not just one point.
Right. And it lies just to the east of the city of Jerusalem.
And east of the temple complex, which consisted of several courtyards plus a building, but in a very, very large platform.
Yeah. But it would have given Jesus and the disciples a great view of Jerusalem. I mean, even though it's dark, they would be able to see the city lying down across the Kidron Valley.
It would be full moon.
Oh, it was full moon because it was Passover.
Because it was Passover.
That's true.
And so, and of course, a lot of the stones that were used in the wall and in the platform were limestone and were light in color.
It would
have been a really a beautiful sight by full moon.
Plus, people are staying up late with celebrating their Passover meals, so the city itself would have been lit with torches and various
Now,
things.
we don't know where this upper room was, but it is clear from the other Gospels that Jesus left and his disciples, Judas is gone out of the picture, and they walked through the courtyard of the temple and then exited on the east and went down into the Kidron Valley and then started up the slope, the western slope of the Mount of Olives. And there on the slope was a place for crushing the olives. There must have been an olive grove nearby, crushing the olives and extracting the olive oil. They called it Gethsemane, which means the olive press.
Okay.
And that's where they stopped.
Right.
And it's not very far up the hill.
Not at the top of the Mount of Olives, but on the lower slope.
No, but elevated enough so they could look across the Kidron Valley,
right,
and see the temple area.
Now, as they go out this way, Jesus has a word of warning for them in verse 27. You will all fall away.
What's this fall away?
Yeah, it's an interesting word. It's the word scandal, and it's the word we get scandal from.
Yes.
We know what the English word scandal means, but in Greek, it was the trip trigger in a trap. I had to say that slowly.
To trap an animal.
To trap an animal. So like if you had a box or a basket set up and you would prop it on a stick and the animal would come in and knock the stick and it would fall down.
Or a mouse trap.
Or a mouse trap. So it's that stick. Or with a mouse trap, it's what the mouse steps on to spring the trap.
Right.
So when Jesus says you will all fall away, he's saying, you know what? I know Judas has already left and
trouble's coming.
Is betraying me.
Yeah.
But you're all going to get tripped up. You're all going to fall into the trap of abandonment and denial before this night is over.
Right.
And of course, that happens to Peter in this lesson. It happens to all of them.
Well, sure, certainly.
Yeah. Now, what about this quotation here? Jesus illustrates their...
Zechariah chapter 13, verse 7 is in a larger section in which God denounces the shepherds, that is, the previous individuals who should have been taking care of the people of Israel, and is saying that when you strike the shepherd, the sheep will be scattered. But then after this verse comes the hope for restitution and rebuilding afterwards.
So he's not actually talking about shepherds and sheep, even Zechariah, right?
No.
He's talking about the leaders of Judah and the people.
That's right. Okay. And the shepherd is the one that God is going to bring about to restore Israel. And so it's bordering on messianism.
Okay. Now, verse 28, it gives us a very important contrast. Verse 27 quotes from Zechariah that the shepherd is going to be struck down and the sheep will be scattered. But verse 28 begins with the word "but," and it's a strong word for "but." There's several in Greek.
It's not something that somebody has read into the text.
Not
it's
at all.
There.
It's there, and it's one of the stronger words.
Right.
On the contrary, after I have arisen. In other words, the shepherd's going to be struck down, but he's going to rise again.
Yes.
I will go ahead of you into Galilee. That implies that the followers of Jesus will be restored. Even though they're going to be scattered, they're going to come back to him in Galilee.
To the central location where Jesus operated during the 3-year ministry.
And where they began their ministry, where he called them,
Right.
where he taught them.
Yes.
So he's going to get the band back together.
Yeah, yeah.
The apostolic band. Yeah. Now,
And then Peter becomes sort of the main object of the story at this
here
point.
we see Peter in all of his brashness, boldness, boasting, impulsiveness, whatever word you want to use.
Yeah.
And not only is he brash and bold, we see him swinging like a pendulum from one extreme to another. One minute he sounds so loyal, and then the next minute he's
confused.
He is deeply confused.
He becomes very confused.
Yeah.
Now, if we were all to start swinging weapons, and he would have known exactly what to do.
Yeah.
But Jesus didn't respond the way he thought Jesus would respond.
So he begins in verse 29 by saying, even if everybody else gets tripped up or trapped into abandonment or denial, I won't. Jesus contradicts him and says, no, in fact, before this night's over, you're going to deny me 3 times, or disown me. And Peter, who never hesitated to disagree with Jesus, it's amazing, just disagrees with him and said, no, I'm telling you. And by the way, the verb here, he kept saying it. He didn't just say it once. And he didn't just say it emphatically. He kept saying it over and over and over again. Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you.
Repeatedly.
Repeatedly. He said it repeatedly. And
the others said the same.
Yeah.
Because Peter said it.
Peter never acted alone. He usually took the lead in his
He knew
statements.
the mentality of the rest.
He verbalized what the rest were thinking.
Yeah.
So
they were thinking it, but he said it.
Yeah. Now we do have a big gap here in our printed text between verse 31 and verse 66. This is where Jesus is out in the Garden of Gethsemane.
Yes.
And his prayer to God, his deeply felt prayer to God.
He takes these 3, Peter, James, and John.
So Peter, along with James and John, goes deeper into the garden with him. And
fall asleep.
So Peter falls asleep.
But Jesus doesn't say, why did the 3 of you, at least the first time, Peter, why did you?
Yeah.
You're going to stick with me to the end. You can't even stay awake.
Exactly. Well, then the soldiers come, and by the way, the people who arrested Jesus were not Roman soldiers.
No.
They were temple guards under the authority of the high priest.
Right, and I think I'm in the wrong chapter here. It says a crowd came and from the chief priests and scribes, a crowd. They're not even described as soldiers. In Mark.
Right. Well, they do come under the authority of the captain of the temple.
Yes.
And when they arrive, Peter, and here's this pendulum swing. One minute he's asleep, next minute he's pulling out a sword and cutting off somebody's ear.
Some people find it hard to wait.
Yeah. Well, then when the arrest is made, the disciples actually fled and ran away from Jesus completely. And that would have included
not Peter.
Well, he fled originally and then must have thought better of it. And according to verse 54, then followed the soldiers as they're bringing Jesus, or the guards, as they're bringing Jesus in to have this hearing before the high priest.
And then we get all these denials in a row.
Yeah.
But the last one, in verse 70, and those standing near said to Peter, surely you are one of them, those Galileans, for you are a Galilean. How did they know he was a Galilean? By his speech.
Oh.
The speech of those of Galilee, the Jews of Galilee, was a strange and a little different form of speech.
Okay.
Aramaic.
So they're down in Jerusalem, in Judea, and the people there could hear the accent of the northerners,
Right.
the Galileans.
Yes.
And probably mocked it a little bit too.
Oh yeah, it was considered to be uncouth
Okay.
by
Yeah,
the purists
Yeah.
down
So
south.
the servant girl claims that she has seen seen Peter with Jesus, and she can identify him by sight, and now others can identify him by his accent.
Now, I think verse 71 needs to be explained because we think that he started cussing. Well, he's not cussing. There were 3 levels of affirming something, the truth of something. Number 1, to affirm it, and number 2 is to take an oath by the name of God or by the sanctuary. And third is the strongest of all, and that is a self-curse. And it would go like this: no, I don't know this man. That's the affirmation. By the life of God, I don't know this man. That is the oath. Or may God strike me dead if I know this man. That's the curse.
The curse, okay. Well, there's another kind of intensifying that goes on here. In the first denial, in verse 68, he says, I don't know what you're talking about. In other words, he denies any knowledge of the fact.
Yeah.
But by the time we get to the third denial, down in verse 71, he says, I don't know this man. And now the denial is really personal.
It's become personal.
Very personal. So
Yes.
he denies Jesus, not just knowledge of Jesus.
And then the cock crows.
That's when the rooster crows, and Peter recalls the prediction of Jesus about his triple denial. And so our printed text ends on kind of a sad note. It says he broke down and wept. And let me point out that the word wept there again refers to repeated action.
More like sobbing.
He just wept and wept and wept. He couldn't get it under control. He just uncontrollably started weeping.
One of the Gospels says that he saw Jesus, and Jesus looked him in the eye.
Yes, there's eye contact there, and that withering look would have been part of what led to this remorse.
Now, this lesson is titled Struggling Faith. What was the nature of the struggle?
Well, Peter had this struggle all along, and the way I put it is this. He was very loyal to Jesus. He believed in Jesus. He believed he was the Messiah.
But he had a program.
He
for
had
Jesus to
his
follow.
own agenda
Yes.
for Jesus to follow.
Yeah.
And he kept trying, when Jesus predicted his coming death, Peter said, no, it's not going to happen that way. We'll defend you, And he right at the end, he has this different agenda for Jesus. And it took his death and resurrection for Peter to finally figure out that he had to follow Jesus' agenda. Not a bad lesson for us, too.
Well, I think so. And we all have our own agendas for what we think the church should be doing and what Christianity is about. But we have to keep going back to the story of Jesus and let his Spirit guide us into the way he sees the world.
So the struggle here wasn't the struggle between belief and unbelief. It was the struggle between believing and trusting in Jesus, or believing and trying to make Jesus accommodate to our own wills.
Yes. Well, we hope, folks, that this has been helpful to you on this Palm Sunday in preparing for the coming Sunday, and we'll be back with you on Easter Sunday, and God bless you this week.
This has been In the Word, a study of the International Bible School lesson with Dr. Lee Magnus, Professor Emeritus of Bible from Milligan College, and Dr. Bill Gwaltney, Professor Emeritus of Bible of Milligan College. Join us again next week for another lesson from the International Bible School lesson text. This has been a production of the First Christian Church Television Ministries.